and another one that's looking at establishing drought-tolerant native landscaping in new development conditions and soils of new developments. And I hate to start off with this slide, but I do because it's important. And what the slide shows here is extinction rates for vertebrate species, organisms with backbones, over time. And this dotted line right here is showing the fossil record, what extinction rates in the fossil record over time as a control, I guess, or a reference point. And what we see is since the 1500s up until present times, extinction rates have increased over 100% for vertebrate species. And of course, this is happening for all types of species on our planet. And some biologists refer to us as the sixth mass extinction of the planet. We've had 5 extinction events historically on our planet. Of course, everyone knows the one about the asteroids and the dinosaurs because it's, we all love dinosaurs, right? So I think about this a lot, and not to be negative, but I think about what I can do about this in my research, how we can conserve biodiversity. And the reason this is critical is because biodiversity is related. We know this from research to ecosystem services, benefits that humans receive from nature. And there's generally 4 different types: provisioning, things like food and water; regulating, these are things such as like flood and disease control, something kind of important. We just all lived through a pandemic, right? Climate regulation as well. Then there's supporting services such as nutrient cycling. When your plants die and they break down in the soil, those nutrients are available for new life, new plants. And of course, we have cultural value services. Recreation, we get recreation from our natural world. People see religious and spiritual value and aesthetics when we think about urban landscapes, right? There's nature provides us aesthetic benefits. So biodiversity is related to that. So we need to start thinking how to conserve and protect biodiversity. Of course, the current driver of biodiversity loss right now globally is urbanization. What this photo shows here is the night sky from space. And you can see the lights, and you can see the United States over here on the left is a very urbanized country when we see this from the perspective of lights. And humans are becoming, this is data from the UN, and we've experienced something really profound in the evolution of humans in that, or in our human history, is that we have switched from a rural species, mostly urban species, and this is increasing. Humans are becoming increasingly more urban. And in fact, the urban areas are projected to double between 2010 and 2050. So this trend is not going away. In the United States, as urbanization is really happening in the form of residential land development. There's been a 5-fold increase just between 1950 and 2000 in these sorts of land types. And they're very similar. On the left here, this is the Villages in Florida, one of the fastest growing communities in the United States. And over here on the right, I don't know where this is, but I put that in there for that reason. You can see these pine trees. Most likely it's not Florida, but look how strikingly similar these 2 environments are to each other. They're both dominated by lawns. They both have a few shrubs in there, likely non-native shrubs. So very structurally not complex, and very strikingly similar. That's referred to as urban homogenization. These across large distances, our residential and urban landscapes are strikingly similar to one another. Now, there's many environmental impacts of this urbanization. Of course, there's loss of biodiversity. We're replacing the native landscapes that used to be there. There's also environmental impacts of maintaining these landscapes, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here. If you don't pick the right plants for this environment, you're going to be over fertilizing, over irrigating, and there's negative implications of that, use of pesticide use for our landscape maintenance. So here's the question: how do we design, construct, and manage these landscapes to support biodiversity, provide ecological benefits, right? And then most importantly, we can probably answer that first question. I know we have, in this room, we have the knowledge of how to do that, but the big questions are the barriers to adopting these more sustainable landscaping approaches. And that's what my lab group gets at. I really love the outdoors, I go backpacking to get away from people. But, isn't it great to be able to sit in your backyard and just see nature? The same thing that you do when you go hiking or boating or something. And I put some species here that I've seen in my neighborhood in Gainesville, Florida. I live right in the city. I see these snakes in my yard, these two types of black racer, and that's a yellow rat snake. I have barred owls nesting around my neighborhood. This is a limpkin, species once of concern, now coming back and using stormwater ponds as habitat. So my residential landscape ecology lab wants to increase the understanding of the ecology of the landscapes where we live. And it's because we're missing an important educational opportunity to connect people with nature in these environments. And of course, we want to, as Henry already said, we want to inform the design, the construction, and management of these landscapes to exhibit greater levels of ecological functionality. So there is evidence we can do better. We have the science to make these ecosystems better. Just a really quick example from my master's graduate, Giselle Niswander's work. She sampled ornamental gardens around north central Florida, and she looked at arthropod pests in these gardens in relation to plant diversity and how structurally complex these plantings were. What she found was arthropod pests here in relation to how spread out plants were. And she found that as plants were spread out in a garden, pest abundance increased. She also found that arthropod predators that feed on these pests, they increase in abundance with alpha diversity. That's just the number of plants in your garden. So from this study, we can predict that if you design gardens by planting them more densely and more species, you might be able to limit the need, as much need for pesticides, because you're creating a pest-resistant environment. So that's one, just one way of designing an ecosystem where we can provide ecosystem services. There's also a growing commercial interest from people, and these are important. This is important. Industry leaders are starting to see the writing on the wall that we need to do things a little differently, and it's largely due to water restrictions. Okay, they're eager for new approaches. Land developers that we're connecting with are saying we're not getting the water permits we need to build the homes we want. What can we do differently? And what you're seeing here in this bottom left picture is the Outside CoLab. It's a gathering of leaders in green industry and land developers and landscape designers coming together to talk about sustainable landscaping in the future, led by Cherry Lake, a big plant producer in north central Florida. This is Brian Kanan. He's an urban planner, and we're all looking at a designed landscape that is irrigation-free native landscape. Over here on the right is the Villages. This is a home that follows a strict HOA guidelines and is converted to all low irrigation native landscaping. And here we have a developer looking at this and seeing this as an opportunity in his development. So there's, these sorts of interests are creating opportunities for emerging markets, those two. So we know how to design things, and there's a will and there's an interest in this from the market, which I think is what suggests there's opportunity to do things better. So I'm going to get into two of my studies right now. The first one is asking, are people getting what they want from their landscapes? I find yards really interesting because they're very variable with social and ecological perspectives. If you look around yards, there's oftentimes differences in how they're managed and designed. There's differences in structure and biodiversity of plants. There's differences in what people want from their yards. And some people view them as status symbols. And this is where most people connect with nature, actually, right? We don't all get to the Grand Canyon, right? We sit in our backyard and enjoy, our backyards. So I don't know of any other ecosystem that is quite as variable at such a small spatial scale as yards, at least in some areas without HOAs. So we look at these yards and we conceptualize these interactions between three groups of variables. Maintenance, that is, what do we input into our yards, such as water and fertilizer and pesticides, how much labor we spend on maintaining our yards, the practices such as mowing and their frequency. Then we think about our landscaping, the plants that we choose to put in our yards, and the vegetation structure, that is, how is it just a lawn, or is it a lawn, a shrub, a tree? How much vertical complexity do we have? And then the ecosystem services we get from our yards. Cultural, aesthetics and utility, for example, is what we looked at in this study. Supporting, how many native plants are we supporting in herbivory, and I'll talk about herbivory in a minute here. Provisioning, such as soil fertility, and then regulating shade and cooling. And I won't get to present all those ecosystem services, but this is conceptually what we're thinking of.
So we have big swimming pools. And
sorry, can everyone still hear me? Okay, so this idea is if we can quantify the relationships among these variables, we can start to guide landscaping design and management to reduce cost and increase ecological benefits and services, and also to enhance the long-term versus short-term cost and benefits. We also want to inform that sort of balance. So we started this study off with the H2O Save database. This is a database that now encompasses about, I think, a third of the municipal areas of Florida. And it shows household water usage at the household level. And this is put together by the Program for Resource Efficient Communities. Let me know if you're interested in looking at these data. It's useful for water conservation. Using this data, we targeted neighborhoods in Gainesville that had variable outdoor water usage. And we thought, okay, this was a good indicator of maybe just an initial indicator of variation in how people manage the intensity by which people manage their yards. If they're irrigating more, they might be managing the yards more intensively. We were also looking for mature landscaping, yards and homes that were built before 1990. This is because we didn't want differences in vegetation, structure, and composition to be due to it being new versus old development. It needed to be of a similar age development. We excluded rental homes because people who live in rental homes engage their yards quite differently. And then homes without pools we excluded as well because that just raised more complications. So we sent out 600 invitations to join in this study, and these four, they're shown here in red, and these red dots, to these households. And about 114 people replied, and they gave us information on the management intensity and the practices that they did in their landscaping here in these four neighborhoods. Yeah, so as I pointed out, these are the 114 people that replied. And from them, we were selected 30 yards to do vegetation sampling. So we had data on their management intensity and what practices, and now we're going out to sample their yards. And what we did in their yards was, in 2021, we went out and we sampled all the plant species. We documented all the plant species in their yard in different vegetation structures, in the ground layer and the lawn layer, such as my students here are looking at, shrub layers and the tree canopy layer. We got data from LIDAR about vegetation structure. We're still analyzing it. And this is just showing what we had to do to identify some species, look under microscopes and whatnot. Then for these 30 individuals, we did a post-survey follow-up asking people, what are the goals that you want from your landscaping, and what are you, to what degree do you feel that you're receiving that benefit? So we did this survey. Just a quick snapshot of our demographics. Remember, we're an urban study. We're looking at urban study, and this is what we found. Most of the respondents were white. Most of them had a higher education level, the 30 people we went to, and most of them were higher income. So this is something that kind of challenges urban ecology. If you read a lot of urban ecology studies, you end up seeing that the demographics of people who respond are usually white, well-educated, and higher income. And this is not a slice of the culture in Gainesville. So we needed to think about how can we expand this to make broader inferences about our study. So we did a follow-up in 2021 where we sent out 1,200 more surveys, and we worked with community leaders in lesser served areas of the town. And now we got 94 respondents. We sampled 60 more yards. And the reason we want to do this is because whatever recommendations we come away with, we want them to be equitable, right? We want people to be able to afford to do this in their landscape if we want environmental benefits. So equitability being a pillar of sustainability, of course. So we did get that. We got lower income neighborhoods and also higher income neighborhoods, more conventional landscaping. So what I'm going to talk to you today, though, is just about our initial 2020 findings. We're still processing the data from the 2021 field season. It's been pretty intensive. It's, in total, we have 90 yards, but I'll just show you the 30 that we sampled in the first field season here. This was a finding that was staggering to me. I did not expect to see this. In Gainesville, in 30 yards, just 30 yards, we found 712 unique plant species. That seemed like a lot to me. We identified 634 of these to species, 72 to genus, and 6 of them we were only able to sample to family. And this isn't us being lazy. We worked with the herbarium and we worked with experts on plant identification. It's just, if you think about an urban residential yard, you're doing a lot of things like mowing, pruning, chopping. So you're cutting off things that we need to identify species to the species level. So like floral parts and whatnot. But I thought that was a really high number. And when we started to break it down, we said, okay, well, what are these species? This table here shows what growth form they were. A lot of shrubs, a lot of herbaceous species, a lot of trees. But down here, let's look at the bottom here. The total number of species native to Florida that we found were 226. Non-native species that were not native to Florida are 408 of them. And of those 408, 58 are actually invasive. That means they are identified as species that are either noxious or environmentally or ecologically harmful. So right away, what can we do to design a better urban landscape? Well, promote native plants that aren't going to become invasive, and let's start working with homeowners to get rid of these invasive plants and educate them on the negative impacts of these invasive plants. I thought 58 species was invasive species was pretty high considering we only sampled 30 yards, so something to think about. Regarding what people want from their landscape, we asked them to rank different aspects, different things from high to low. And this is what they gave us here. We asked them about these things. And so when we asked them to rank, if it's ranked highest, it's actually lowest on this table. Okay, so aesthetics, for example, is ranked highest here, right? Because this is the average ranking. So most people have ranked aesthetics as highest. That's probably not surprising, right? People want their yard to look nice. The second one was wildlife habitat. Then they said they wanted a comfortable environment. They were interested in native plants. They were interested in water conservation. The property value was the least of their concerns, which was also surprising to us. But when I talk to realtors, oftentimes landscaping isn't a major issue for home buyers. So who knows? So anyway, this is the ranking we got. Then we looked at that maintenance data from these 30 homes, and we came up with this principal coordinates analysis, and I'll walk you through what this means. Basically, 2 dots on this graph here are individual homes, and the closer they are to each other, the more similar they are with all the landscaping practices we asked them about. So these 2 homes are very similar. This dot here versus this dot here are least similar. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. And if you look across this going from left to right, what you see is these variables: outdoor water usage, lawn irrigation, lawn fertilizer, non-lawn fertilizers, and non-lawn irrigation. So lawn irrigation and fertilizer are what made people different across going left to right. So this individual over here is using more water, more irrigation, and more fertilizer than somebody on the left. So if you look at this and you see water usage is going left to right is very high, that already tells us that people who manage your yard more intensively are defeating the goal of water conservation. Now, we asked that question about the cultural services that people identified as important, the aesthetics and the comfortable environment. And we asked them, hey, how much do you get utility, a comfortable environment, leisure enjoyment, and aesthetics out of your yard? And we related it to that axis of management intensity. And what we found was a negative relationship. So people who manage your yard more intensively got less utility out of it. And they also had a less comfortable environment. Management intensity was not related to leisure enjoyment or aesthetics. So we also did this again for wildlife habitat and native plants. What we found was native plant diversity was actually negatively related to management intensity. So it went against that goal of native plants that people wanted. And then we looked at herbivory. Okay, and I remember I said I talked about herbivory. A lot of times people think herbivory is bad for a plant, right? But actually herbivory means that when you see something eating your plant, it means it's supporting wildlife, it's supporting biodiversity, arthropods, things that birds feed on, right? So a certain threshold of herbivory is a beneficial thing from your yard. So what we did was we ranked herbivory on this ordinal scale from 1 to 5, 0 to 5, where 1, 2, and 3 are probably just indicators that the plant's providing a food resource for benefit, arthropods. 4 and 5 is probably an indicator of a pest that's killing your plants, right? And so what we found was herbivory was negatively related to mowing and negatively related to pruning, 2 common management practices. And the overall herbivory that we found was at very low levels, so not indicative of pest, more indicative of our environmental benefits that we want from our yards. We also asked people to say how often they saw wildlife in their yard, and there was no, even though that was a goal of theirs, there was no relationship between wildlife observation and management intensity. So what do we find? When we thought about cultural services, they were either negatively or no evidence of relationship to management intensity. Regarding the supporting ecosystem services that people wanted, wildlife habitat and native plants, again, we found no relation, is either negatively related to management intensity or no relationship we found. So what we're finding is a management conflict. We found conflict between what people want from their yards and the management intensity that we're doing. And so there's a gap between what people want and have. This actually is a great thing to find out, right? This is a marketing and educational opportunity. People aren't getting what they want. So what it's showing us is there's opportunity to start working with people on what they perceive, how they perceive their yards, what they want from their yards, and how to get it. So of course, we only did 30 yards in Gainesville. We still need to do a lot more to confirm that. Some other things we did for this study where we standardized, we created this sort of, this is a work in progress. We worked with green industry professionals to develop this. My student, PhD student, Jesse Jones did a standardized cost calculator for landscaping. So if you go to a landscape and you look at it and say, okay, how much would it cost to maintain this style of landscape versus this style? We can come up with standardized estimates. So we'll start to look at those long-term costs of maintenance versus the short-term cost of installation. Again, landscaper people such as yourself are dealing with problems that people put in the ground and walked away from it. Now you are helping people maintain those problems, or not maintain the problems, helping them deal with the problems, sorry. We're also doing an EDIS publication, which is, I just was editing this morning. It's looking good. It's almost ready for submission. Looking at the ecological value of lawn weeds, these things that people want to kill. There's a lot of native plants that people perceive as weeds that have ecological benefits. And my undergraduate student, Alyssa Malikova, is working on this. Ultimately, we want to develop a landscaping sustainability guide, much like your utilities or your appliances. You go and you say, this refrigerator is going to cost you X amount per year to maintain. We would love to get to that point for this project, where we can hang up a sign and say, this style of landscape is going to cost you this much. It's going to cost you this much in irrigation, this much in fertilization. These are the environmental benefits or costs that you'll have on this landscape versus another landscape. In order to get there, we've got more data to analyze. For example, our LiDAR data. We want to work on developing predictive models to guide that prototype of that guide. We're going to do some focus groups as well. We would like to start the ID barriers to adopting more sustainable landscaping. We know we can design them, but getting people to adopt them is a different story. And we want to repeat this in different communities. We realize that Gainesville is hardly reflective of all of Florida, and it's hardly reflective of the globally, right? So, but this is we have the methods in place and we can go elsewhere. Okay, so for the next project here that I'm going to talk about this is a really unique opportunity that we're working with private industry. I mentioned that There's industry leaders who want to do something different with their landscapes, and there's opportunities for emerging markets for that. And this is part stems from that in this evidence. This is Deseret Ranch. Deseret Ranch is over 300 area ranch in Florida. They actually have an 80-year development plan for their ranch over an 80-year period. They're currently the largest landowner in Florida. And up here in the north is this Sunbridge development, which is the first phase of this development project. And I'm sorry, and the partners on this project are Tavistock Development Company, Cherry Lake, one of the biggest plant producers in north central Florida of shrubs and trees and expanding into native plants. Life Soils is a company that is trying to work in urban landscapes to improve soil health and improve sustainability through improving soil health. I'm working with Patrick Boland from University of Central Florida, and the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy is also contributing to this project because they see it as a model for future potential future land development practices. So here's a map of where the land development is occurring, kind of a footprint of the first phase. And the developers approached the program for resource efficient communities and our Sustainable Floridians benchmark program because of these lakes that they have on site. These lakes are really beautiful, wonderful lakes. They're very pristine. They're very high quality aquatic systems. And they're concerned. They said, we want to make sure that whatever we do with our development is not going to impact these lakes. First, because of the environmental benefits of them, but mainly because they see them as an amenity to their community, right? They want them to remain something valuable to the people that are moving into their development. So they need a solution. What can we do in this development that does not help to protect these lakes? And they are also facing water restrictions, okay? They cannot build the amount of homes they want based on the water that they're permitted in this area. So they want us to help them out with this. And one of the things that we thought of was, well, we hear this thing that we have to water our plants in a drought, right? Or else they're going to die. But if you go out into the natural environment, you go out into the forest, you go out into other areas, plants seem to be doing just fine during most droughts, right? That we get in Florida. There's a lot of native plants that are very drought tolerant. So we suggested, well, why don't we start to explore native plants in your landscape? The developer couldn't care less about native plants, but they did care about water conservation. And we also thought if you were using drought tolerant plants, you wouldn't need irrigation, you wouldn't need fertilizer for these native plants. So that's another way that we might be able to protect lakes that they're concerned about. And I'm sure everyone on the talk is probably thinking at this point, yeah, but what about development soils, right? We all know that urban soils are not native soils, right? Yeah, and this is, I don't want to paint a rosy picture of this development. This is a development, right? They go in, they clear out the native environment, they bring in fill soil to grade it, to bring it above the water table. Now you have this fill soil that's very sterile and harsh, and it's very compact because you have lots of machinery overrunning it. It's not a good environment for any plant to grow, let alone a native plant, right? So we wanted to come up with a solution of how to approach this. And what I'm showing here is an aerial view of the base camp, what they call base camp. It's the entryway to the development. Here's some natural areas that it butts up against. Across the street is Del Webb, a more conventional development. And here we set up an experiment that doubled as an ornamental landscaping feature coming in through to the development here, where we have 20 by 30 foot plots that look like a garden. But people, we hopefully don't think people think this looks like an experiment. They think it looks like a garden. So this is the entryway in the community. This is sort of like when people come in to buy a home, they come in here, they see this as the lifestyle that they could have. Over here is going to be a community agricultural center. So if anyone's interested in working on that, let me know. And as I said, we set up this experiment. And what we're doing here, the goal of this is to look at native plant species that can thrive in residential developments, new residential developments, identify species that we can advance in markets. We want to look at irrigation and soil amendment approaches that can help to establish these native plants. We want to understand public perception of these native plants. And we're also working to look at the pollinator and ground dwelling arthropods and beetles, because they're indicators of ecological services from these sorts of plantings versus more traditional landscaping and urban development. Oh, sorry, my slides aren't advancing. Okay, so it's going to inform landscaping designs. We're going to help hopefully demonstrate feasibility of installing native irrigation-free landscaping, mitigate the need for irrigation of fertilizer, hopefully set a precedent for future land development and codes. And we're also going to involve 4 graduate students, 2 PhD and 2 master's students, who at the end of this aren't just going to be trained in research, they're going to be trained in forming partnerships with private industry to help actually have real in-world impacts of their research, which is something is very valuable to me, and my lab group for that matter. So here's kind of the landscaping design of our experiment that we have. Again, these are 20 by 30 foot plots. It's about a 400 foot long area, the corner of the dominant landscaping feature. We have a trail walking through the planting for people to connect with these plants and get to feel them and experience them. And we have 2 irrigation treatments. The one is irrigate as needed. Once these plants are established, we're going to shut this irrigation off and see how these plants thrive in the absence of irrigation. Then we're going to do the regular irrigation, what we call the lazy irrigation approach. Okay, this is if the standard approach of just turning the sprinklers on at a set period every so often to water the plants. This is kind of what we call the lazy irrigation approach, right? And then the other treatments that we're incorporating are compost or no compost into the soil. The compost is an organic matter, mixture of organics that is hopefully trying to add some organic matter to the soil. We know that adding compost to development soil can help increase water holding capacity, but we also want to see what it does for plant growth. It's a restoration approach to enhance the ability of these native plants to establish under these harsh soil conditions. So what we're going to do is, over a 2-year period, quantify plant survivorship and growth. We're going to quantify the public perception of these plantings to see, hey, would you be okay with this in your yard? And we're going to look at the pollinators, ground-dwelling beetles. We're going to look at soils. We're going to look at the organic content, carbon, nitrogen ratios, pH, water holding capacity, and bulk density, kind of indicators of soil health, or the ability for plants to grow well there. We're going to document the irrigation amounts and the maintenance amounts. And we're also going to document pest and herbivory, okay, as indicators of stress. And herbivory also as an indicator of ecological benefits again. So here's just kind of a picture before the plots are installed. This is my PhD student, Brooke Moffis. He's also a county agent in Lake County. She's working with me on this project, and just to demonstrate that we are in fact working with classic development soils. She's having a very hard time putting that soil core into the ground, right? So we have very compact soils at this site. So it is going to help us mimic development conditions. What you see here in this figure is us taking soil cores, but over here is the pH levels across this experimental gradient that we set up where our experimental plots are. And this is really interesting to us. Generally, when we think about development fill soils, we think of very sandy soils with a higher pH. And we were surprised that these fill soils actually had a great variety in pH. So it was a lesson learned for us that we cannot assume that all development soils have the same chemical properties. They're not homogeneous, right? That's something that is going to be very challenging moving forward when we think about how to design better landscaping in developments. We can't assume all soil conditions are the same. So probably it suggests that we do need to just get out there and do some soil sampling to test this out. But we did set up a block design to help us control for that variation across this experiment. So here's our compost amendments. This is Darren Midland. He's the president of Life Soils, incorporating his compost into the soils using a rototiller, and we tilled all the soils here to control for that effect of tilling, because tilling could also benefit plant growth by breaking up that soil compaction. Here are the 28 plants that we've used. Some of them are tried and true. We know they work in urban landscapes, right? Yaupon holly, for example. There's firebush in here. We know these are things that we use in urban landscapes, muley grass, but we also did some other things that aren't used as commonly, Joe pie weed, cardinal flower, some other frog fruit people are starting to use as ground covers. And the reason we did a balance here was because we are working with the developer and the landscape architects to make sure that this planting isn't just a success experimentally, but it also needs to be a success from a design perspective. We can't look ugly. This is the entryway to a development, right? And the developer is concerned that this might look ugly. So in case all these other native plants we're trying out fail, we learned something about them, but we also have the ability to make this landscape feature still look nice. It's kind of a great opportunity because I've done experiments in the past within the context of an ecological restoration, but I haven't done them yet in the context of a development or a landscaping feature. So that's what we have going on here. The developer and the landscaping architects wanted to use in-ground irrigation because they see that increasing in frequency in land development, this sort of adding hoses into the ground. I was more in line to using sprinkler heads, but they said, no, the developers are starting to use more in-ground irrigation. So we went with that. And in the end, this is what the planting in the one corner looks like. This is in January here, it was completed. Okay. So it's, it's in its very early stages, with the weather being so dry right now, these plants haven't really grown. Let's look at them in a year. It's going to be exciting. We're going to measure them with drone photography to measure plant growth at that large 20 to 30 foot plot level. Okay, so moving on. The developer liked this experiment and they wanted to do something with their model homes. They have 12 model homes, and Dix Height and Kane and Associates developed a landscaping palette for these model homes or designs that did not have any turf grass in them. And then once the plants are established, could be irrigation-free landscaping. They had a community center where there was some lawn for people to play in, for kids to play in, but they wanted these to be irrigation-free native landscapes for their model homes to show to would-be home buyers. And when they designed them, the builder came in and they did something different. Okay, we learned something. This is an unincorporated area. This area that's being developed is not incorporated at any township necessarily. So there is no law saying that the builder, once they buy the lot, has to follow this landscaping design. So they did what they wanted. They installed turf grass. They did install some drought tolerant plants, and it wasn't all turf grass. So that's sort of a win. And they also installed solar panels on the roof. So that's also a win. This is better than all turf grass, but it certainly isn't what we were pushing for. But we learned a important lesson. We have to bring the builder into this conversation earlier. And there also needs to be codes being developed, which are being developed right now. For when the builder buys that lot, they have to be held accountable to what the landscape design is. There has been improvements, and some of the newer model homes do in fact now have all native landscaping. Here's one of them. There's 4 different species here: blueberries, native blueberry, there's blanket flower, there's purple spiderwort. I forget what this tree is, I apologize. And why only 4 species? Well, there's a barrier to this. The developer says, we'll go with this, but it has to be the same price as turf grass. Okay, or else we're not going to go. We're not going to pay more. So we had to cut corners. The landscape designer had to cut corners and come up with a way. But hey, this is still a landscape that potentially could be very irrigation free and have some ecological benefits. You don't need fertilizer for these plants, so it's still meeting that goal. And it can be expanded upon in the future by the homeowner if they wanted to add more plants to it. So the next phase of this is they're doing model homes where they're adding compost now to the soils to look at how that helps the establishment of these native plants. And what you see in this picture here is the president of Cherry Lake, Tim Sallin, and Gail Hansen, an landscape architect professor at University of Florida. And we're going to do some evaluations on how to improve these lots. And this, again, this isn't a panacea. You see the turf grass put in here requiring irrigation, but it's a step in the right direction. And this is a multi-phase project where we have the opportunity to work together on it. So I'm going to move ahead here. So potential savings. I did some back of the envelope calculations of the impacts of this, assuming the full build out of this community, which is 29,000 homes. And if we follow IFAS fertilizer and irrigation recommendations, and we consider the average landscape area of these plots, which is less than 1/10 of an acre, they're small lots, we could save anywhere from over 344,000 pounds to 888,000 pounds of nitrogen per year, based off of IFAS fertilizer recommendations. If you look at phosphorus, over 57,000 pounds a year. Of course, we're in Florida. We don't really need phosphorus, but some people apply it. Regarding irrigation savings, we could save anywhere from 3.8 to 14.1 million gallons of water a day. That's over 1.4 to about 5.2 billion gallons per year, in the size of essentially anywhere from 2,000 to over 7,000 Olympic swimming pools per year. That's a lot of water and fertilizer saved if we were to adopt these landscaping approaches. And the variation here is due to variation in estimates for different turf varieties, and also variation in acceptance of what your turf quality would want to look like. Do you want it to be a little brown versus totally green all year, sort of thing. We also did back of the envelope calculations for CO2 emissions. Now, what's CO2 related to with landscape maintenance? It's related to mowing, it's related to pesticides, it's related to fertilizer production and spreading, and it's also as strongly related to irrigation, the energy used to pump water to our irrigation systems. So we can save over 9 million pounds of CO2 per year adopting these plants. Okay, so rhetorical question here, which is easier to maintain? Look at that bottom picture, you think, well, it's just lawn, all I have to do is mow it, and there's a couple shrubs there, it's probably easy to maintain. But from a homeowner perspective, I'm going to challenge that, okay? I started reading IFAS recommendations for fertilizer and mowing and irrigation. I'm a plant ecologist, and I was getting a headache, and I was like, I wouldn't want to follow this. I wouldn't want to deal with this if I was in an HOA. So this might be why people hire services to deal with it, because all right, I buy a bag of fertilizer, I see what percentage it is. Now, in order to do IFAS recommendations, I have to do some math, and who wants to do that on the weekends, right? If it was simply mowing, it might be easier. The picture up top, those native landscapes, what do you have to do? Once they're established, I don't know, mow them. You don't have to mow them. You do a little trimming, go out and weed some plants. So you might have to train the homeowner to, I would argue that a homeowner could maintain that with a little bit of education while drinking their coffee on Saturday. So just throwing that out there as a point of conversation. I'm going to wrap this up here. In the long term, this is what we're hoping to do. We have the opportunity to now look at the ecological and the cost and benefits of standard landscaping nearby in that Del Webb community to our reimagined sort of native landscaping, and versus our natural environment, right? So we have this opportunity to say, are we restoring some of the functionality that we see in our natural environments in these sort of reimagined landscapes? Again, we think this is an opportunity in foreign landscaping design, increase native biodiversity, limit irrigation and fertilizer by a lot, set a precedent for future development, and train future people to work with industry on sustainable land development. Again, this is a multi-decadal build out, so there's an opportunity to collaborate going forward. From the lessons we learned this first round, we can always do better the next round. And then, so I'm going to wrap it up with that. Is there an opportunity to design ecologically beneficial residential landscapes? And I think everyone in here would agree with me, yes, right? We know how to do it. We can do that. We have the science to do it, but is there the will from the homeowner? And well, there's a disconnect. What we're seeing is an initial disconnect between the management that people are doing in their yards and what people want from their ecosystem services. So that's an educational marketing opportunity. And hopefully that second example of the project, which we don't really have data on yet, shows that there are industry leaders who are looking at change, wanting to do change, so there is an opportunity. they're facing water restrictions, they're eager for new approaches, and there's opportunity for emerging markets. And just as an example, Cherry Lake is actually looking at opportunities to turn this into a landscaping marketing. How can I be the leader in maintaining these new native irrigation-free landscaping? And of course, there's academic private partnerships are going to be instrumental in coming up with these changes. So with that, I think I went over my talk time a little bit. I apologize, but thanks everyone for your time. Hopefully I'm looking forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iannone, and it's amazing research.
Thank you.
John, you want to go over the question? I have this very active chat room over there.
Oh, great. So, and also, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat. Is that okay? And I can share it again if I need to, but I'll enter my email into the chat right now. Please contact me if you have any other questions that we don't get to today.
So I can also try and dig up some of these questions for you. I was keeping track of some of them here. So let's see. Lisa Williams, did you consider using keystone plants that Doug Tallamy speaks about in the landscape?
Yeah, of course, Doug Tallamy. Yeah, he was at that outside collab that I showed. He was actually the keynote speaker there for that event. He's great. So here's what happened with this. And this is, again, you know, we have to be comfortable with imperfections as we move forward in sustainability, right? The landscape architects and designers wanted to come up, one of their priorities was, can we come up with irrigation-free native landscaping that we can get at the cost of sod? Okay, that was the priority. So no, the answer to that is no. The next step is for the ecologist on the team. We're going to work together to come up with a report card and sort of some suggestions on how to improve those keynote species. Now, regarding the ornamental plantings, yes, there are some species that we know definitely have pollinator and benefits, and also arthropod pollinator benefits and things. So with the experimental planting, the model homes, not so much, but phase 2, right? So good question.
So again, another question. Will native grasses like switchgrass be used instead of non-native turf grass? So I think you kind of covered some of that in terms of the species list and all of that.
Yeah, no, well, we haven't used it, but I don't know that. And, you know, the problem is, does it grow like a lawn? Can it handle the traffic like a lawn? It has to have the similar function. If you're going to put it out like a lawn, you need to make sure it functions like a lawn. And that's where I think we run into problems with some of these native species. You know, people are going to want to mow them. They're going to hack them, and are they going to grow that well? You know, that's something we don't know. And that was something that, you know, we would have to talk to turfgrass scientists about, you know.
Okay. Let's see. I'm looking for any other questions. If anyone's got anything, go ahead and speak up right now, or go ahead and put it in the chat box.
No, speak up. I like hearing people's voices.
Well, hi, I'm Diane Goldberg, and I do have a mostly native garden, and I do have a lot of variable witchgrass, and it grows low, so it doesn't really need to be mowed. I have not put in a location though to use instead of turfgrass, only because my city has not bought into it. But I do have it in different places in my yard, and it's working beautifully in shady locations as well as sun, spreading slowly. So I do need to see if I can find a place where I can get some seed or plugs or something so I can get more of it. I do also use a lot of ground covers, different varieties. I don't know if it would be the ones that I use for the Treasure Coast would be appropriate for all locations in Florida, but you can always go on the Florida Plant Atlas to verify that before getting them. But I'm talking about low growing plants for areas that you want to use instead of grass, like your sunshine mimosa or fog fruit. But they're also wonderful because they're host plants for caterpillars. So they're not only giving you the beautiful butterflies, and we have some beautiful moths, but you're also bringing birds to your yard. So you're getting a wonderful variety of wildlife that everybody likes to see. So I do give you lectures on that.
Great. So yeah, Diane, so please send me that list. So we do have sunshine mimosa and we do have frog fruit planted in those locations in the garden, the experiments. And Tim Sallin, the president of Cherry Lake, and also Mark Gotts from Green Isle Nursery, a native plant nursery, has really been pushing frog fruit as a ground cover, and I actually have it growing throughout my lawn. I purposely just have it spreading through my lawn. I still mow it. It can mow. It tolerates mowing. It tolerates a moderate amount of traffic. It's a great pollinator plant. I love it, and I fully agree with you. It's an awesome plant. Thank you for letting me know about witchgrass. I'm going to look into that. So just to in full disclosure, I am not a Florida native plant expert. Okay, I'm learning. So if the audience out there has really great suggestions for us, please let us know. We really want to hear them. And I wasn't joking when I say talking to turfgrass, because I do know turfgrass people who are starting to look at native plants as ground covers. And so this is because they see also opportunity for more environmentally beneficial ground covers, especially in areas where lawns, we don't need the function of a lawn. Think about how many areas of yards that people don't stand and play on their lawn. These are opportunities for things that can deal with like less traffic and serve and provide an ecological benefit, such as what Diane was talking about. Yeah, so great. And then I see Mariano Corral has a hand up.
Yes, sir. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
I'm glad you touch towards the end about the soil media, because that's one of the issues that in many seminars when we attend, no one talks about that. And that is the most viable portion of any plant material to survive. And as we know, not all four types of what we need in the soil, which, as you mentioned, structural, drainage, the capacity of holding nutrients and water, not all the soils contain that, so we have to amend it to it. Now, having said all that, and I'll keep on repeating every time I come to a seminar, how do we get the people that are reviewing our plans and looking and giving comments when they have absolutely no knowledge at all? And I think we've got Ida Curtis here as well, and she can attest to that. People that I'll give you a case, and it just happened to me 3 days ago. Because of certain codes that Miami-Dade has, if you cannot plant street trees on these right away, you have to place them on your property. Now, having said that, the tree that has to be placed, it has to be a shade canopy tree, like an oak or mahogany, which I would not use mahogany in a street tree, as we know why. But and the tree from the property line to the building from the property line to the face of the building is 15 feet away. They forced me to put an oak tree, 42 of them, in the middle of the 15-foot space. I tried to explain to them, so don't tell me it's a 12-foot tree with a 2-inch caliper. The tree grows, it gets big. What do you think is going to happen when the canopy starts hitting the building? All right, there are other trees here that we can use, smaller trees. But without someone like yourself, or even myself too, I've tried to help people in the that are reviewers and explaining to them certain situation, but it's frustrating. I mean, I'm almost to the point of giving up.
Well,
I need people like you, like professors, people that can come in and say to the director, hey guys, your staff has got to go through some sort of a continuing education. We do it for landscape architects. You know what? If you want to have people working here reviewing landscape plans and so forth, or giving comment or arborist, you have to have continuing education. And I'm frustrated. I mean, I'm done with this. I'm 69 years old, doing this for 40 years, and it gets to a point you say, Jesus, enough.
So, well, thank you for your hard work on that. And I would say, don't give up. You hit a magic word though, code. Holy cow, right?
Yep.
Code. Yeah, you know, even we have seen like the most well-intended code be a barrier to innovation. And I think the key here is we all know this. And once we can get some examples on the ground of real world initiative, like, so for example, all right, I have this like dilemma where I work with land developers. Do I want land development to happen? No, not at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. But I work with them because they come to us and say, I want to do something better. I'm going to seize that opportunity, because especially in an unincorporated area like where I'm working now, where there isn't code, they can try different things. And we can showcase that and say, look, this is working. People like it. It's benefiting. It has an environmental benefit. So I think that's one way, but it's a long battle. It's a long battle. And then once it sets a precedent and other counties start to adopt code, other municipalities start to adopt things, we also have to work with them. And this is something that I'm not familiar with. Gail Hanson, who I showed a picture of, was wanting to do an in-service training on writing code and guiding people, agents, on helping them inform code, because we've been hearing this so much. I'm not an expert on it. I read legal code, and I'm an ecologist. I want to have fun with my experiments. But it's a critical thing. I don't know, but we have to lead by example, and we have to show that these examples work. And we also, in the future code that's written, we need to make it flexible. We need to make it flexible, right? I mean, like, one of the things, I'll give you an example of things that drive me nuts: a plant species list. You have to use one of these 3 species. Why not show like, hey, we need plants that function like this in this location, so we can enhance. Like, what did that do? Benefits for enhancing biodiversity in urban landscapes, that people actually had freedom to try new things. Yeah, so I'm with you.
And a couple of other things, because, and forgive me if I'm taking a little bit of time from other people, but it's so critical. I sit on the design review board for a city in Miami, and I try not to follow the land development code. If a plan comes before me that makes sense, that is attractive, adds to the entire community for the neighborhood, I have been slapped in the hand and said, no, 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 you must follow the land development code. And when I try to explain to them realistically what happens on the field, they still do not understand. The second point is, you mentioned about going native. I've tried at every project of mine, major project, to at least do rain gardens, introduce that wherever I see swale areas, and try to introduce that. The biggest problem I find is that the growers cannot grow native plants fast enough.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, when we see our codes stipulating it's got to be 24 inches in height, and my native guy tells me, hey, I only got it 14 inches, man. I mean, that's what I got. It's too much. So that's the other portion I think that everybody should understand, that there has to be a period of time that must be given to grow these plant materials.
So,
and thank you for your show. I mean, for your seminar. It's very good, by the way.
thank you. So, but thank you for, I meant to bring that up. Okay. The fact that it shows that these model homes that are going in, and the experiment, and the interest from the developer, and what we're seeing from people in general, it just shows there is a clear need for environmental horde agents to be working with people on native plant production. If any of your significant, your higher ups say that that's not true, you know, you need to be doing something else, tell them absolutely false. There is a demand for that. There's absolutely a demand for that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, guys, it's 1:05. A really is amazing conversation here. I see a lot of pros and cons, to be honest. I mean, cost. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, to say the least.
Need people to train to do their actual work. I agree. Janine Griffith, I just want to close with that. I grew up mowing my own lawn, taking care of my own yard. I still do. And I kind of find it bizarre when people don't take care of their own yards. But I think it's oftentimes because of HOA codes making it too complex to keep that lawn alive, keep that landscape alive. If we could make it simpler and ecologically better, I think we have a win opportunity for win-win, and for people to get out there and connect with their yard a little more. Wouldn't that be wouldn't that be fun? So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Sure. I'm going to launch the post test. It's going to be the same one as the pre. I know many of these questions is not applicable to you. So if you have the last choice, I mean, no, it is not applicable to you, put over there NA, because these questions really are mainly for not for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and so just to clarify that I asked these questions because this land development thing that I'm working on, I'm very interested in trying to make it replicable for agents. You know, how can I have agents also do, you know, who are interested in that? Maybe, you know, we're wrestling with how replicability of this program. So.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah, the recording is going to be emailed to everybody. The presentation, I don't know if Dr. Iannone, the presentation as a PDF file could be emailed to everybody also.
Sure. I'll send a PDF to you in a minute after we get off.
Okay, great. And CUs also, we have a CUs for ISA, for landscape inspectors, FNGLA, and pesticide people. Remember, there is a 10 fee for CUs, so, you know. Other than that, I think we're done. You want to add something else, John?
No, I'm just looking at the results here, and I mean, I really like the discussion that we had going on here. It's too bad we can't have you for another hour, but I guess we'll have to have you back at some other point here.
No, if anyone wants to reach out to me, please do, and I'm okay with hanging out. I mean, this is more fun than what I'm going to plan on working on today. So, so in full disclosure, so this is why I like my job. So thank you.
All right, guys. So thank you very much. Remember, in 2 weeks we had a number 4. I cannot remember the title, but I'm sure it's going to be great, like the previous one. So thank you, guys. Have a great lunch and a great week and a great weekend and a great life, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye, guys.